August 10, 1981. A stretch of highway in Vero Beach, Florida. Two fishermen moving along a drainage canal, a routine morning. Nothing unusual, just the sound of water and the weight of a southern summer pressing down on everything. And then they saw it.
At first, they didn't understand what they were looking at. The mind protects itself that way. It tries to make sense of things, tries to find another explanation. There wasn't one. Floating in that canal was the severed head of a little boy. He was 6 years old. His name was Adam Walsh, and by the time America learned that name, nothing would ever be the same again.
Before he became a name on a law, before he became a face on a milk carton, before he became the reason America changed the way it protects its children, Adam John Walsh was just a little boy. Born on November 14, 1974 in Hollywood, Florida, Adam was the kind of child that made every room feel brighter. Blonde hair, big smile, full of life in the way that only 6-year-olds can be, completely, recklessly, beautifully unaware of how dangerous the world could be. He loved Star Wars. He loved swimming. He was at that age where everything was an adventure and nowhere felt unsafe, because no one had ever given him a reason to feel otherwise. His parents, John and Reve Walsh, were, by all accounts, a devoted, loving family. John was a hotel executive, successful, ambitious. Reve was warm, attentive. They lived in a comfortable home in Hollywood, Florida. They had built a good life. Adam was the center of it. Friends who knew the family described him as bright, curious, and fearless in that innocent way small children are fearless, not because they are brave, but because they have not yet learned what fear is for. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did his parents. Neither did America. Because on the morning of July 27, 1981, a perfectly ordinary Monday, Reve Walsh took her son to the Hollywood Mall to do some shopping. A normal errand, the kind of thing families do 1,000 times without a second thought. Adam was wearing a green-striped shirt, blue shorts, and sneakers. It was the last outfit he would ever wear. And within the next few hours, a clock would start ticking, one that the Walsh family, law enforcement, and an entire nation would desperately race against. They would lose.
Monday, July 27, 1981, Hollywood, Florida. The kind of summer morning that hits you like a wall the second you step outside. Thick air, blinding sun, the sort of heat that makes everything feel slow, lazy, almost dreamlike. Reve Walsh had errands to run. She took Adam with her to the Hollywood Mall, a large, busy shopping center just a few miles from their home. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. It was just another day. They walked into the Sears department store sometime around noon, and this is where the story and Adam Walsh's life pivots on a single devastating moment. Reve needed to look at lamps in the home furnishing section. Adam, like any restless 6-year-old, gravitated towards something far more interesting, a video game display near the front of the store. A small cluster of older boys had gathered there, taking turns playing Atari games on a demonstration unit set up by the store. Adam wanted to watch. Reve, just a short distance away, let him. It would only take a few minutes. Those few minutes were all it took. When Reve would turn to where she had left Adam, he was gone. At first, she wasn't alarmed. Children wander. He was probably just a few steps away, distracted by something else, the way 6-year-olds are. She looked around the display. She checked nearby aisles. She called his name. Nothing. The casual searching became urgent. The urgent searching became frantic. She moved through the store faster now, her voice rising, her heart beginning to understand what her mind was still refusing to accept. Adam was not in the store. Sears staff were alerted. The mall was notified. A search of the surrounding area began. But here is something that would later haunt investigators and the Walsh family alike. What happened in that Sears store in the moments before Adam disappeared was witnessed by people who were never properly questioned.
A security guard, it later emerged, had reportedly asked a group of boys, including Adam, to leave the video game area after a dispute broke out between them. The older boys were asked to go, and somewhere in the chaos of that moment, Adam Walsh walked out of that store. Whether he followed the older boys outside, whether someone led him, whether someone was waiting, nobody knows for certain. What is known is this. At some point between noon and 12:30 p.m. on July 27, 1981, a 6-year-old boy in a green striped shirt walked out of a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida, and was never seen alive again. When John Walsh was reached at work and told that Adam was missing, he drove to the mall immediately. He would later describe that drive as the longest of his life, a desperate, praying, bargaining kind of journey that every parent dreads in their deepest, darkest moments. He arrived to find his wife, frightened, searching, and no Adam. The Hollywood Police Department was called. A missing persons report was filed. And here, right here, is where a second tragedy began to unfold alongside the first, because the response that followed was not what it should have been. In 1981, there was no national system for missing children, no Amber Alert, no coordinated federal response, no immediate lockdown of exits, no protocol that treated a missing child as the emergency it was. A missing child was largely treated as a local matter, a temporary problem. In many cases, police assumed runaways, assumed family disputes, assumed the child would turn up. Adam Walsh was 6 years old. He had nowhere to run to. But the system didn't know how to treat this differently. And so while John and Reve Walsh stood in a parking lot in the Florida heat, screaming their son's name into the summer air, the clock was already running out.
When a child goes missing, time does not behave normally. Every hour feels like a day. Every unanswered phone call feels like a verdict. Every well-meaning neighbor who shows up at your door without news feels like another small death. For John and Reve Walsh, the days following July 27, 1981 were exactly that. A slow, agonizing unraveling of hope, held together only by the desperate refusal to stop looking. The search for Adam Walsh began almost immediately. Volunteers flooded in, neighbors, strangers, people who had seen the flyers, because John Walsh moved fast. He was not a man who sat and waited. He printed flyers, he made calls, he contacted media outlets. He did everything a father could do when the system around him was moving too slowly. And it was moving too slowly. The Hollywood Police Department, to put it plainly, was not equipped for this. Investigators pursued leads that went nowhere. Tips poured in from across Florida and beyond as the case began attracting media attention. Each one had to be followed, each one had to be eliminated. And with no centralized system, no national database, no coordinated framework, it was chaos dressed up as procedure. John Walsh would later describe the experience of dealing with law enforcement during those 2 weeks as one of the most frustrating and dehumanizing experiences of his life. He was a father, desperate, willing to do anything, and yet at times he felt like an obstacle, a grieving parent who needed to be managed rather than a partner who could help find his son. He pushed anyway. Reve Walsh, meanwhile, was living inside a particular kind of hell that only a mother in that position can truly understand. She replayed that moment in the Sears store endlessly. The lamp display, the video games, the few minutes she had stepped away. A few minutes. She would carry the weight of those few minutes for the rest of her life, even though what happened to Adam Walsh was not her fault, even though no reasonable person could have predicted what was coming. Guilt does not deal in reason, it deals in moments, and that moment would never leave her. As the days passed, the search widened. Flyers bearing Adam's face were distributed across Florida. His photograph appeared in newspapers. Local television stations ran his story. Tips came in from dozens of locations, shopping centers, roadsides, neighborhoods. Every single one had to be investigated. Every single one turned out to be wrong. 1 week passed, then 10 days, then 12. The brutal statistical reality of missing children cases is this: the longer a child is missing, the less likely a reunion becomes. Law enforcement knew this. The Walsh family, somewhere beneath their hope, knew this too. But you don't stop. You cannot stop, because the alternative, the thing waiting on the other side of stopping, is something no parent can allow themselves to face. So John Walsh kept making calls, kept talking to media, kept pushing the police, kept flooding Florida with his son's face. And Reve Walsh kept waiting by the phone. 14 days after Adam Walsh walked out of that Sears department store, the phone call came. It was not the call they had been praying for. It was something else entirely. Something so devastating, so brutally final, that it didn't just end the search. It ended the life the Walsh family had known forever. August 10th, 1981. 13 days after Adam Walsh was last seen alive. 2 fishermen were making their way along a drainage canal off the Florida Turnpike near Vero Beach, a quiet, unremarkable stretch of water about 120 miles north of Hollywood. It was a Monday morning. They were not looking for anything, and then they were. What they discovered in that canal would set off a chain of events that would shake an entire nation. But in that moment, on that quiet Florida morning, there were just 2 men standing at the edge of dirty water, staring at something that made no sense. Made no sense because the mind, the merciful, self-protecting human mind, refuses to process certain things quickly. It was the severed head of a child. A little boy, blonde hair, 6 years old. Authorities were called immediately. The Hollywood Police Department was notified, and within hours, what investigators had feared most, what the Walsh family had spent 14 days desperately praying would never happen, was confirmed. The head belonged to Adam Walsh. His body was never found. Let that land for a moment. His body was never found. In the days and weeks that followed, searches were conducted along the canal and surrounding areas. Divers went into the water. Ground teams swept the brush. Every effort was made to recover the rest of Adam, to give his parents something more to bury, some small mercy in the middle of an unmerciful thing. It was not enough. To this day, only Adam's head was ever recovered. The cause of death could not be definitively determined because of the condition and incompleteness of the remains. What investigators could say was this: Adam Walsh had been murdered, killed by someone who had taken deliberate, calculated steps to dispose of his body. This was not random. This was not accidental. Someone had done this. Someone had looked at a 6-year-old boy and made a choice. Now came the task that no human being should ever have to perform: telling a mother and father that their child was gone, not missing, not somewhere out there waiting to be found. Gone. John Walsh has spoken publicly over the years about the moment he received the news. He has described it in the way that only people who have survived the unsurvivable can describe things, with a strange, detached clarity, as though some part of him stepped outside of himself in that moment and watched from a distance, because being fully present inside it was simply not possible. Reve Walsh collapsed.
There are no words adequate to what the Walsh family experienced in the hours and days following that confirmation. Grief of that magnitude, the grief of a parent who has lost a child to violence, is not something that can be accurately described from the outside. It can only be witnessed, and even then, only partially. What can be said is this: Adam Walsh was buried without his body. A 6-year-old boy who loved Star Wars and swimming and video games at the Sears department store. Gone. And in the wreckage of that grief, in the absolute devastation of those days, something else was beginning to form inside John Walsh. Something quieter than grief. Something colder. A fury so focused, so determined, so utterly unrelenting, that it would eventually reach all the way to the halls of the United States Congress. But before that story could begin, there was another one that needed to be told. The story of how the people tasked with finding Adam Walsh's killer failed him. Again, and again, and again.
There is a particular kind of injustice that lives inside incompetence. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with malice or intention. It simply fails, quietly, bureaucratically, and in the space that failure creates, the wrong people go free and the right people never get answers. That is the story of the Hollywood Police Department's investigation into the murder of Adam Walsh. And it is a story that is almost as difficult to comprehend as the crime itself. Let's go back to the beginning. From the moment Adam Walsh was reported missing on July 27, 1981, the Hollywood Police Department was the lead agency on the case. And from almost that same moment, cracks began to appear. The first failure happened within hours of Adam's disappearance. When Revea Walsh reported her son missing at the Sears department store, the response was not what it should have been. The mall was not immediately locked down. Exits were not sealed. The window of time in which Adam, or whoever took Adam, could have been contained was left wide open. In fairness, this was not entirely the fault of individual officers. As established earlier, there was no national protocol for missing children in 1981, no system that mandated immediate aggressive response. Officers were working within a framework that was fundamentally broken. But the failures did not stop there. As the investigation progressed, or failed to progress, a pattern emerged that would define this case for the next 2.5 decades. Evidence went missing. Tips were mishandled. Witnesses were inadequately interviewed, and the leads that should have been pursued with urgency were instead allowed to grow cold while investigators chased dead ends. One of the most glaring examples involves the Sears security guard, the one who had reportedly asked the group of boys, including Adam, to leave the video game area shortly before his disappearance. This individual was a critical witness, potentially the last person to see Adam Walsh inside that store before he vanished. It took investigators an inexplicably long time to properly document and follow up on this witness account. By the time the full picture of what had happened in that Sears store began to emerge, time had passed, memories had faded, the trail had cooled. Then came the evidence, or rather, what happened to it. Over the years, as the investigation stumbled forward, a series of deeply troubling revelations emerged about how physical evidence in the case had been handled. Items that should have been preserved and cataloged with absolute care were instead lost. A carpet sample from a vehicle connected to a suspect, gone. Critical documents, misplaced. A bloody knife, yes, a bloody knife recovered in connection with a suspect, logged, stored, and then somehow lost within the evidence system of the Hollywood Police Department. Gone. A bloody knife in a child murder case. Gone. John Walsh has spoken about these failures with a controlled, devastating fury that is somehow more powerful than rage. He did not scream, he did not break down, he simply laid out the facts, one after another, and let the weight of them speak for itself. The weight was enormous. Because here is the thing about lost evidence in a murder investigation. It is not just an administrative failure. It is not just a procedural oversight. It is the difference between justice and nothing. It is the difference between a killer facing consequences and a killer walking free. It is the difference between a family getting answers and a family spending decades in the suffocating uncertainty of not knowing. The Hollywood Police Department gave the Walsh family that uncertainty for 27 years. And through all of it, through every failed lead, every lost piece of evidence, every press conference that produced nothing, every anniversary that passed without resolution, there was a name that kept surfacing, a name that confessed, then denied, then confessed again. A drifter, a killer, a man so deeply, disturbingly violent that even among convicted murderers he occupied a category of his own. His name was Otis Toole, and his connection to Adam Walsh is one of the most chilling, maddening, and complex threads in the entire history of this case. That is where we're going next.
There are people in this world who exist outside the boundaries of what most of us can comprehend. Not because they are mysterious, not because they are complicated, but because the things they are capable of, the things they have done, sit so far outside the realm of normal human experience that the mind simply struggles to hold them. Otis Elwood Toole was one of those people. Born on March 5, 1947 in Jacksonville, Florida, Otis Toole's life was, from the very beginning, a catalog of dysfunction, abuse, and darkness so profound it is almost difficult to read. He was raised in a household defined by neglect and instability. He was allegedly dressed in girls' clothing as a child by family members, a detail he would later reference repeatedly in accounts of his early life. He claimed to have been sexually abused. He dropped out of school young. He drifted. And somewhere along the way, at an age that should have been filled with the ordinary business of growing up, something in Otis Toole broke, or perhaps it never formed correctly to begin with. By his own admission, Toole began setting fires as a child. Arson was not just a compulsion for him, it was described by those who studied him as something close to a source of pleasure, of excitement, of release. It was an early, unmistakable signal of what was coming. What came was Henry Lee Lucas. In the mid-1970s, Otis Toole met Henry Lee Lucas, a drifter, a killer, a man whose name would become synonymous with one of the most disturbing criminal partnerships in American history. The two formed a relationship that was equal parts volatile and codependent. They traveled together. They killed together. Or so they claimed. Because here is where the story of Otis Toole becomes additionally complicated and additionally maddening. Both Toole and Lucas were, at various points, among the most unreliable narrators in the history of American true crime. They confessed, prolifically, enthusiastically, to murders across multiple states, some of which they almost certainly did not commit. Investigators later determined that many of the Lucas and Toole confessions were fabricated, sometimes coached, sometimes invented wholesale, sometimes offered in exchange for better prison conditions or simply for the attention that confession brought.
They were, in the words of more than one criminologist who studied them, professional confessors, which created an almost impossible problem. Because when Otis Toole confessed to the murder of Adam Walsh, how do you know if he was telling the truth? Toole first confessed to killing Adam Walsh in 1983, 2 years after the murder. He provided details. Some of them were disturbingly specific. Some of them were inconsistent. He claimed he had driven to the Hollywood Mall that day, claimed he had lured Adam into his vehicle, a Cadillac, claimed he had driven north. He later recanted, then confessed again, then recanted again. This cycle, confession, recantation, confession, repeated itself multiple times over the following years. Each time Toole confessed, investigators had to take it seriously. Each time he recanted, the case was thrown back into uncertainty. But here's what made the Toole confessions different from his other claimed killings. Some of the details he provided about Adam Walsh were details that, investigators argued, only someone present at the crime could have known. The location of the body, specific details about Adam's clothing, the manner in which he described the disposal of remains. These were not details that had been made public. These were not details that could have been assembled from newspaper coverage or television reports. And yet, Toole knew them, or claimed to. The bloody knife recovered in connection with Toole, the one that was later lost by the Hollywood Police Department, was considered by some investigators to be potentially critical forensic evidence. Had it been properly preserved and tested, it might have provided the definitive link between Otis Toole and Adam Walsh. Instead, it was gone. And so the question that should have had a scientific answer was left instead to interpretation, to argument, to the deeply unsatisfying territory of probably and almost certainly and we believe but cannot prove. Otis Toole was never charged with the murder of Adam Walsh. He was convicted of other murders, multiple other murders. He was sentenced to death, a sentence that was later commuted to life in prison. He died on September 15, 1996 in Florida State Prison, of liver failure. He was 49 years old. He took whatever full truth he carried about Adam Walsh with him.
And for the Walsh family, for John and Rive, who had spent 15 years watching this man confess and recant and confess again, his death, without ever being charged, without ever being held accountable, without ever being made to stand in a courtroom and answer for what he did to their 6-year-old son, was its own particular kind of devastation. A door that closed without ever fully opening, an answer that remained permanently, agonizingly half-given. But here is what must be said. Otis Toole did not break John Walsh. Nothing broke John Walsh. Because somewhere in the middle of the grief and the rage and the incompetence and the confessions and the lost evidence and the years of nothing, John Walsh had built something. Something that would reach further than any single investigation, something that would outlast Otis Toole, outlast the Hollywood Police Department's failures, outlast every dead end and every broken promise and every anniversary that passed without justice. Something that would put over 1,000 dangerous criminals behind bars. And it started, as so many great and terrible things do, with a television set.
Grief, in its rawest form, is paralyzing. It pins you to the floor. It empties the room of oxygen. It makes the simplest tasks, getting up, getting dressed, getting through a single hour without being pulled under, feel like climbing a mountain with no summit. Most people, faced with the kind of grief John Walsh carried, would have been forgiven for disappearing into it entirely. John Walsh did not disappear. He detonated. In the months following Adam's murder, while the investigation stumbled and stalled, and the Hollywood Police Department fumbled evidence and chased dead ends, John Walsh was moving. He was talking to legislators, talking to advocates, talking to anyone who would listen about the catastrophic inadequacy of the systems that were supposed to protect children like Adam. And people listened. Because John Walsh was not just a grieving father. He was a grieving father who was also, by nature, by profession, by sheer force of personality, extraordinarily good at making people pay attention. His first major battle was legislative. In 1981, the year Adam was taken, there was no federal law requiring law enforcement agencies to enter missing children's cases into a national database. There was no coordinated national response. There was no centralized system for tracking missing children across state lines. A child could disappear in Florida, and law enforcement in Georgia would have no formal, systematic way of knowing. This was not a gap in the system. This was the system. And John Walsh was determined to burn it down and build something better in its place. He traveled to Washington, D.C. He sat in front of legislators. He told them about Adam, about the green striped shirt, about the video games, about the drainage canal in Vero Beach. He told them about the Hollywood Police Department, about the lost evidence, about the 2 weeks of searching while the country had no infrastructure to help. He was not emotional in the way people expected a grieving father to be emotional. He was precise, controlled, devastating. And it worked. In 1982, just 1 year after Adam's murder, the Missing Children Act was signed into law. For the first time, law enforcement was required to enter missing children's cases into the FBI's National Crime Database. A small step, but real one. Then came something larger. In 1984, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was established, a nonprofit organization that would become the cornerstone of America's missing children infrastructure, a centralized resource, a coordinated system, a place where cases could be tracked, tips could be processed, and families could find support. John Walsh was one of its founding advocates.
Because legislation, as important as it was, had a limitation that John Walsh understood instinctively. It lived in government offices and legal documents and databases that ordinary people never saw. John Walsh wanted to reach ordinary people. All of them, every single one. And in 1988, 7 years after Adam's murder, he found his way to do exactly that. America's Most Wanted premiered on Fox Broadcasting Company on February 7, 1988. The premise was straightforward, revolutionary in its simplicity. Each week, the show profiled fugitives, wanted criminals, dangerous individuals, people who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system and disappeared into ordinary life, and then it asked the public to help find them. John Walsh was the host, and he was extraordinary at it. Not because he was a polished television personality, though he became one, but because every single time he stood in front of that camera and told the story of a criminal who had hurt someone, who had taken something that could never be given back, he knew exactly what he was talking about. He had lived it. That authenticity, that unspoken, ever-present understanding that this was not entertainment for him, that this was personal in a way it could never fully be for anyone else in that studio, it came through the screen, and America responded. The show was an immediate phenomenon. Tips flooded in, fugitives were identified, arrests were made. Week after week, season after season, ordinary people sitting in their living rooms called a phone number on their television screen and helped put dangerous criminals behind bars. By the time America's Most Wanted ended its remarkable run, it had helped in the capture of over 1,200 fugitives. 17 of them were on the FBI's Most Wanted list. The show led to captures in all 50 states and in multiple countries around the world, and it was built, every single frame of it, on the foundation of one father's refusal to let his son's death mean nothing. But John Walsh was still not finished, because there was still a name that had never been charged, still a case that had never been officially closed, still a family that had never received the full, formal, legal acknowledgement of what had happened to their boy. And in 2006, 25 years after Adam Walsh was taken from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida, John Walsh stood beside President George W. Bush in the White House and watched as the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act was signed into law.
The act created a comprehensive national sex offender registry. It established tougher penalties for crimes against children. It strengthened the systems designed to track, monitor, and prevent the kinds of predators who had taken Adam.
John Walsh did not smile in the photographs from that day. He looked like what he was, a father who had spent 25 years turning the worst moment of his life into something that might protect other people's children from experiencing the same. It was not justice. It was never going to be justice. Justice would have been Adam Walsh growing up, going to school, falling in love, living a life. But it was something. And John Walsh, who had started this journey as a hotel executive in Hollywood, Florida, with a 6-year-old boy who loved Star Wars, had become one of the most consequential child safety advocates in the history of the United States, built entirely out of grief, built entirely out of fury, built entirely out of love for a little boy in a green striped shirt who never made it home from the mall. There was still, however, one final chapter in the official story of Adam Walsh's case, one that would come 2 years after that White House signing, one that would attempt, after 27 years, to give the Walsh family something they had been denied for so long: a name, an answer, a closing of the file.
27 years is a long time to wait for an answer. It is a childhood, a career, a marriage, a life built and lived and changed beyond recognition. For John and Reve Walsh, 27 years was the distance between the day they lost Adam and the day the Hollywood Police Department finally, officially, told them who they believed had taken him. December 16, 2008, Hollywood, Florida. Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner stood before cameras and microphones and made an announcement that had been a long time coming. The department was officially naming Otis Toole as Adam Walsh's killer. The case, one of the most haunting, most followed, most consequential missing child cases in American history, was being closed after 27 years. Chief Wagner did not mince words. He stated that after an exhaustive review of all available evidence, a review that had been conducted over the preceding 2 years by a dedicated cold case team, the department was confident that Otis Toole had abducted and murdered Adam Walsh on July 27, 1981. He acknowledged the failures, not in the sweeping, systemic way that a full accounting would have required, but he acknowledged them. The lost evidence, the mishandled leads, the years in which the investigation had not moved with the urgency or competence that the case demanded. It was, by any measure, an insufficient acknowledgement of an enormous failure, but it was an acknowledgement. John Walsh, standing before those same cameras, was, as he always was, measured, controlled. He accepted the closure. He said that he and Reve believed Otis Toole was responsible, that they had believed it for years. But he also said something that cut through every carefully prepared statement and official announcement and departmental press release. He said that closing a file was not the same as justice, and he was right. Because here is the reality of what December 16, 2008 actually was. It was not a conviction. It was not a trial. It was not a jury of 12 people examining evidence and deliberating and returning a verdict that carried the full weight of the legal system behind it. It was a police department, the same police department that had lost evidence, mishandled witnesses, and fumbled one of the most high-profile child murder cases in Florida history, announcing its own conclusion about its own case, with no defendant present to challenge it.
Otis Toole had died in 1996, 12 years before the Hollywood Police Department got around to officially naming him as Adam's killer. He had never been charged, never been tried, never been convicted. And so the closure offered to the Walsh family on that December day in 2008 was, in the eyes of the law, not closure at all. It was an opinion, A well-investigated, carefully considered, officially endorsed opinion, but an opinion nonetheless. And in the years since that announcement, questions have continued to surface. Some investigators and researchers who have studied the case extensively have raised concerns about the totality of the evidence against Toole. They point to the inconsistencies in his confessions, the details he got wrong, the details that were never fully verified, the absence of forensic evidence definitively placing him at the scene, evidence that might have existed had it not been lost. They are not suggesting Adam Walsh was not murdered. They are not suggesting Otis Toole was an innocent man. He was not. He was convicted of multiple murders. He was a dangerous, violent predator whose crimes against other victims are thoroughly documented. What they are suggesting is that in the specific case of Adam Walsh, the full truth may be more complicated than a press conference can contain. John Walsh himself has expressed, at various points over the years, a complex relationship with the official closure. He has said he believes Toole did it. He has said the evidence taken in totality points clearly in that direction. But he has also never pretended that a closed file erases 27 years of institutional failure. Never pretended that an announcement brings back what was lost. Never allowed the official narrative to paper over the real, human, devastating cost of what happened, not just to Adam, but to his family in the years that followed. Revé Walsh has spoken about living with the uncertainty that never fully goes away, about the way a case like this doesn't end, not really, not for the people at the center of it. The file closes in a police department somewhere, the press conference happens, the cameras go away, and the family remains.